are about to experience Jackson Snyder Presents, produced by the Vero Essene Yahad and sponsored by Hebrew Nation Radio. Vero Yahad is an Essene Zedekite think tank. We produce new translations of scriptures, promote ancient texts that have something to do with the Nazarene Israelite faith, and promote the study of Hebraic roots, the origins of Christianity, and the very best parts of both faiths. I am your host this evening, Boyan Thrumkov, and this is Jackson Snyder Presents. Greetings and felicitations, Havarim. Hope you all are doing well and remembering your older relatives that get very little visitation from you. Maybe you could call today. Maybe you could go visit. They're not going to be with you forever, even the ones you do not like. You never know. They might be a warm stone right now. You might have an opportunity to sow seed to need and change their life. Yes, and maybe you might learn a little something about your heritage too. Honor your grandfather and grandmother, whether they be your blood or not. People need encouragement, especially older people. They are not all members of Senior Citizen Center, playing pool, crocheting quilt, watching Price is Right together on television. No, very few go to Senior Center, Most stay home. They feel alienated at this time of life. They're in the stage that one must acknowledge one's mortality and know that it's coming up soon. Never mind all the noise in the background. That's the Vero Essene Yahad cook, cooking up something good. I can smell it. I think it's like we had in Old Country. Stuffed pepper with lamb's eyes. Anyway, do what is right. Sacrifice, pick up phone, get in car. Go see that one that you've neglected, because you will be blessed. And if you get blessed out when you go, just remember, in the time of the millennial era, you will definitely get blessed. So we had a surprise session at Vero Yahad, where we ask people if they had questions, to give them. And we really had just one pressing question, and that was concerning Yeshua and Yochanan the Dunker. Somebody had been reading Slavonic Josephus that John the Baptist was 30 years older than Yeshua. They want to know about that. They want to know relationship between Yochanan and Yeshua. And then we have Brother Snyder, after answering that question for a long time and going into every detail and off every rabbit trail and into every dark corner he could think of. Finally, the people there, they know, don't ask question of Brother Snyder, because he never will get done. But he did get done and no more questions, so he talked about Armageddon. And did you know there is new news about artifact found in Armageddon that bears a relationship with the Revelation? And so Brother Snyder, in the second segment of show, gets all wound up about that and tells you about new artifact and just exactly how significant this thing is for the interpretation of this most curious book that all people say going to happen pretty soon, with all plagues and fire falling from heaven and all earth shaking and scorpion coming down your chimney, whereas he think it all done. We got nothing to worry about when it comes to a revelation. Who is right, who is wrong? Is everybody right and everybody wrong? Do we really have to worry about star coming down on Earth and destroying half population? Or can we account for this prophetic part of Revelation being fulfilled? It would be a wonderful thing if we didn't have to look toward disaster on the whole Earth. Because these days we need to be looking for the perfecting of the earth, the cleansing of the earth, the revelation of the Yeladim of Elohim. Now, Pastor Creamley, down at church I go to sometime, Ukrainian, Polish, Orthodox Church of the Guiding Light and Presumptuous Assumption. Pastor Creamley, he say, he listened to show one time about Revelation being fulfilled. He say to me, this Jackson Snyder, he's a heretic. I tell you a story earlier that he tell me I have to stop coming here to Vero Essene Yahad, or I be kicked out of church, branded a heretic, and finally I go to hell, bypass purgatory altogether. This bothered me for a long time. I go back and see Pastor Creamley and ask him about it. I said to Pastor Creamley, you think what Brother Snyder do is spiritual adultery? Pastor Creamley say, adultery? Adultery? Oh, thank you, Brother Shumkov. You make me remember where I left my bicycle. Oh, yes, I guess I'm as bad as Brother Snyder as far as getting off on tangent. So I just let him lead you into the dark cave and bring out some kind of treasure, like maybe box of dried chicken soup.
The question comes, did John the Baptist preach different than Yahshua? Different in what way? In style? In doctrine? In locations? I suspect you mean in doctrine. Yes, I can deal with that. Slavonic Josephus? Yes, he's 30 years older. That's a possibility because Josephus ran into who I think is probably John the Baptist and was baptized by him. And Josephus, I think he was born about 37, 39, something like that. Because he says when he was a teenager, he was attracted by one of these wild men Baptists, baptizers, I should say, dunkers. He was trying to contemplate which way to go. Being 17 years old, in those days, if you were in a decent financial position, which he was a son of a temple priest and a high priest. At 17, you would get out from under the teaching of the local synagogue or homeschooling. And if you wanted to pursue higher education, what you would do is you would go hire yourself a teacher. And we see in the Gospels, John is baptizing at Bethany beyond Jordan, at Bethabara, I think. And that's where Yeshua goes to get baptized, and that's where he runs into Nathanael, Andrew, and Kepha, who are down there too. And I think they were looking for a teacher. So the young man that wanted to go farther or go into some type of ministry position would discontinue his apprenticeship with his father, assuming that he already knew a trade. That was the first order of business, that he learn a trade. And at 17, he would go find himself a teacher. So here we have Bethabara, Yahshua getting baptized, and he comes out, and he's identified as the Lamb of Yahweh. Whether these fellows knew that or not is beside the point, because instead of the students picking their teacher and negotiating with the teacher for a price, you see, this is how the teachers made a living. They would go down to these places where young people were looking for a teacher. They would talk about what they could teach, and they would try to get some students. Instead of that happening, Yahshua picks his own students, and he picks 3 candidates there, and I think Philippos was there too. And he picks them, and he says to them, we've got to go right now. If I'm calling you to go with me as a teacher, I am a graduate of such and such, an Essene seminary, probably Qumran, or probably a wilderness camp, or probably the one up, they say, is in Mount Carmel. And I am authorized to teach. I'm 30 years old. You had to be 30 years old before you could take that kind of a job. Picks his disciples, and he has to go right straight up from there, according to the Gospel of John, to Cana in Galilee, where his brother's getting married. Shimon the Canaanian. All right, Shimon's in Cana. Cana is right beside Nazareth, just a few miles away. But they've got to get there immediately. I write historical fiction. In my story anyway, he doesn't tell them much. He just simply packs them up with goods to take up to the wedding, including fresh fish, which was a delicacy for those people, because when they went out to fish and they caught good fish, they didn't eat them. They sold them for money because they had this mark of the beast. They had the tax to pay. They had to get the tax stamp in order to keep in business. So all the fish they would gather that were edible and larger, they would have to sell to Romans or Greeks or richer people. What these common people ate was salt fish. They would keep the minis, and they would salt down the minis. My business is getting off the subject, you know. They would salt down the minis. They would eat that kind of fish, seldom fresh fish. There is a parable in the Gospel of Thomas. There was a fisherman that cast a net, and he pulls a net in, and he looks at the net full of fish, and he sees one big fish. And he's a wise fisherman because he takes the big one out and throws the other ones away. That's an interesting little parable that is certainly earlier than the Gospel parallels, giving us an idea when the Gospel of Thomas was written, probably quite early, 50 or before.
Brother Snyder, you suppose that he threw out the minis because his time was worth more than the money he might get for those little fish? Time is money, you know.
I think you're probably right on the nose there. I didn't think of that, of course, but leave it to you, Shroomkopf. Good for you. So Yahshua goes forth to the wedding, and then the gospel writer tells us that John is captured, taken to Machaerus, the stronghold, and there in Machaerus is Herod Antipas, Aristobulus, his cousin, Herodian, his niece, and his niece's daughter, whose name was Salome. And Salome dances before Antipas. She's a young girl, and he's drunk, and he promises her the head of John the Baptist, which he regretfully takes, gives it to the girl in a bowl, and the girl takes it to the mother. Why does this have anything to do with anything? Why? Because we find Salome again in the scripture. We find her in Paul. In Romans 16, Paul says, "And greet the household of Aristobulus and my kinsman Herodian." He's admitting there that he's a Herodian. He's a cousin of Antipas and the rest of the Herods. But he greets Aristobulus. And who is Aristobulus married to? He's married to Salome, who was the young girl that danced before Antipas and got the head of John the Baptist. So he greets the household there, but he doesn't mention her name, which is pretty interesting to me. And then Herodian is the son of Salome. That was Herod the Fifth. Herodian means the littlest Herod. If you read the New Testament code or James, the brother of Jesus, you know all this stuff, but it is so interesting. So we find Salome's influence going clear up into the Pauline epistles, the epistle to the Romans. All those Herods were brought up in Rome, so they were probably living there at that time. But John goes forth preaching a particular message, and that is a message that contained the words shuv. Shuv is a very strong word. It means turn back or change your mind. So we find him going out and saying, repent, for the kingdom of Yahweh is at hand. He goes out to do that until his death, but he preaches an ascetic gospel. He calls the Pharisees and scribes vipers, which they were. I can't believe anybody follows rabbinic Judaism today, because rabbinic Judaism is identical with the Pharisaic sect of the first century. John also talks about in the Slavonic Josephus of his lifestyle. Josephus calls him a man like a wild man. John is brought before the authorities. They ask him some questions and he answers them. I only eat tree food off of trees. And we read in the Gospels, and especially the Aramaic New Testament, that John only ate wild honey and flat cakes, not locusts. Locust is a mistranslation. Flat cakes. He was a vegetarian. He ate only tree fruit at that time. The people that ate in that manner were thought to be more holier than those that ate flesh. Most of the vegetarian types, did eat fish. And the Ebionites, the sect that is our ancestor sect, Ebionites and Nazarenes, they didn't eat flesh, of course. So John is proclaiming in a way, when he says, I only eat tree food, his sect. And he's saying right there that he's an Essene. Essene is a term that is very misleading, because what we call Essenes today are these people at Qumran with the Dead Sea Scrolls. But in Josephus, the Essenes are described quite differently than the Dead Sea Scrolls describe those people. All of a sudden, John's dead and Yeshua arises. And what does he preach? Exactly the same words. Repent, for the kingdom of Yahweh is at hand. He personifies the kingdom. When he speaks of the kingdom, he is, at least in the minds of the gospel writers, speaking about himself as the kingdom personified before people. He is the successor to John the Baptist. And I'll add one more thing, another mistranslation. And I can't apologize for pointing out mistranslations. Your Bible, according to my ability to translate, is full of deliberate mistranslations. The Ebionites and the Nazarenes complained about the same thing. They didn't believe the Old Testament was a canon. They complained and made known to anyone even today that wants to read that they believed that there were forged parts in the Old Testament, the Tanakh, and especially in the Pentateuch. What do we call that? The Torah. The Nazarene Acts tell us all about what those false passages are. Let's see, where was I? So they started out preaching the same message. Oh, yes, John chapter 1. I think it's 1, maybe 2. John is speaking. John the Baptist is speaking in John's Gospel. And he said that he's not worthy to unlatch his sandals because he was before me. You can look that up and see exactly what it is. But in the Greek, that doesn't say that at all. I don't know how they can translate it that way. What John the Baptist says is because he was my first. He was my first, speaking of Yahshua, being his first something. There's no noun there. So while we can maybe think of that as his first disciple, Yahshua being John the Baptist's first disciple. And if that's the case, then it's quite possible that what Josephus is saying, that he was 30 years older, is true. In fact, I wouldn't believe anything in the Gospel of Luke unless I did further research to try to prove it from another source, because Luke is so very late, and Luke is based on the Antiquities of the Jews by Josephus, which was written in the mid-90s, 60 years after the fact. Yahshua comes preaching the same message. And then what he does, though, that varies, is that he has to cure people and show the signs that are recognized in the Old Testament Tanakh too of the one who was to come, the Messiah of Israel, who would raise the dead, heal lepers, and so forth. And Yahshua proclaims that very same thing by preaching in the Nazareth synagogue from Isaiah 61. He says that in that day lepers will be cleansed, the blind will see, the lame will walk. The acceptable year of Yahweh will be preached. I can't remember exactly how it starts.
I remember it to be, the Spirit of Yahweh is upon me to preach the good news, poor, etc., etc., the other signs of the new Moses Messiah.
All right, so did that answer that question? I think Josephus is more authentic than, is it Luke? Luke says that they're 6 months apart. I think that Josephus is authentic. I think because Josephus wrote much earlier than Luke did, first of all. And the second thing is Josephus says that he went to the dunker named Banya, or Banias from the Greek, with the S on the end. He went to the dunker looking for his tutor at 17 years old, and he went down there and got dunked and spent some time with Banya. Now, Banya is not a person's name. It means the Baptist of Yahweh, Ban Yah. So he's protecting the family of the Baptist, who were Zadokites. They were Essenes. So I think Josephus would know that for sure. He said he couldn't make it in that sect, though. He doesn't tell us why. It was probably too hard to make it. He'd lived a soft life, and trying to get into the Qumran Essenes or the wilderness camps was not easy. You spent 1 year on your own in the desert, you see. So that's why we got a figure like John the Baptist that can live off tree food, and in caves. All right, that's all I can say about that. Is that satisfactory? The answer is they preached the same thing, but their works were different. Yes, you will need to have a recording of that.
Armageddon.
What I was looking at right before is Armageddon, because there's been a profound archaeological discovery this week that tends to validate my theory that the revelation is history. We have no fear from the prophecies of the revelation of Yahshua HaMashiach to Yochanan. It was kind of a sticking point. It was one that I really didn't have a reason to say that, yes, Armageddon had happened, but now I do. There was no, say, archaeological proof, nor was there a documentation concerning anything happening during the Jewish war at Armageddon. Now there is. Are you interested in that? All my life, the prophecy teachers, futurists primarily, have made a big deal of Armageddon. If you recall in Revelation 16:16, see if I've got the quote here, starting at about verse 8 and 16, the fourth angel poured out his bowl on the sun. It was allowed to scorch men with fire. Men were scorched by the fierce heat, and they cursed the name of Elohim, who had power over these plagues, and they didn't repent and give him glory. Then the fifth angel poured out his bowl on the throne of the beast, and its kingdom was in darkness. Men gnawed their tongues in anguish. So he's poured this bowl out on Rome. As you know, at the same time, or just before the siege of Jerusalem, Rome was on fire because there was a civil war there after Nero had Paul's friend there kill him.
Jackson Snyder Presents is sponsored by Vero Essene Yahad, a biblical literature think tank headquartered in Vero Beach, Florida. Vero Yahad provides new translations, online seminars.
As you know, at the same time, or just before the siege of Jerusalem, Rome was on fire because there was a civil war there after Nero had Paul's friend there kill him. Paul's friend Epaphras was a freedman of Nero. His name was also Epaphroditus. Epaphras is the shortened form of that. Epaphroditus, whom Paul talks about extensively in Philippians 2. Was Nero's secretary and freedman. He was a slave of Nero at one time. Nero set him free. A freedman was free, except they had to work for wages for their master for usually the rest of their life, or until they gained enough money through working for them that they could pay off their debt and therefore be really free. So Nero leaves the palace, goes down to Epaphroditus' house, and asks Epaphroditus to help to end his life, which Epaphroditus holds the sword. Nero falls on it, and it got him through the neck and head, though we don't know whether Nero lived or died for sure. He just disappeared after that. Nobody knows what happened to him. There was a real big gap after Nero went that was filled at first by public acclamation of an old general from Spain whose name was Galba. Galba came in, and he had the markings of a pretty good emperor, but he refused to pay a graft to the Praetorian Guards. The Praetorian Guards were the parts of the army, the elite forces that surrounded the emperor and protected him. So the Praetorian Guards murdered Galba after a very short time, just a few months. Into that power vacuum came Nero's friend, Otho. Otho lived a profligate lifestyle. As I said, he was a friend of Nero. When I say friend, I mean he knew Nero, if you know what I'm talking about there. They shared a wife, Pompeo Sabinus. He came in from Portugal or Lusitania with an army from Lusitania to take over Rome then as emperor, and he was able to do that in short order. Otho got in there. He wasn't concerned about his own protection that much. He was concerned about having an ongoing party while Rome was burning. And so Otho finally ended up in a very short time killing himself, because if he didn't kill himself, then the next guy that came in was about to get him and would have tortured him and prolonged his death a long, long time. This all happened in a year and a half. The next guy came from Germany. His name was Vitellius. He came from an old Roman family. He was also a friend and general for Nero. He brought a huge army to Rome and was able to get there through the troops of Otho without much problem. And when he got to Rome, he did something very unusual. He brought his troops into Rome. The troops always stayed outside. See, the men in the troops were primarily mercenaries from foreign countries, like Germany. You know, they were barbarians that had been enlisted there or had been captured there. There were troops from Africa, from Carthage, from as far away as what we call Iraq today. There were troops from southern Africa, did I say Mauritania? All over the empire. There weren't that many Italian troops, like this fellow Cornelius, who's spoken of in Acts 9 and 10, the friendly centurion that helped everybody at the synagogue. That's almost laughable. These centurions were very hard and murderous men that had to keep in line a group of mercenary soldiers from who knows where. So these centurions were extremely tough guys, and they were tasked usually by their superiors with the murders that had to be done. There weren't too many of the Italian troops or the Roman troops that were Italians. They had a shortage of men, big time, and 40% of the Romans were slaves. Can you imagine the tension that Roman citizenry were under at home when 40% of the population were slaves wanting to be free? Oh, I was talking about Armageddon, right? So Vitellius comes in, and instead of leaving all these guys outside Rome, he brings them in. And he says, boys, have a good time. And his army, which was vast, came into Rome. They sacked Rome. They killed a lot of the citizenry. They were on a rampage of rape and theft and murder and every other kind of thing. They were also setting things on fire. They set Rome on fire in that year. You remember in 64 AD, just 5 years before, Nero set fire to Rome and fiddled while Rome burned, and Christians burned after that because they were the ones blamed with it. So Rome was just getting built up again when these soldiers took what they could and burned the place, while Vitellius, the general, he thought nothing of it, but he became a very paranoid dictator in a short time, and he began to move to kill all his competition there. We still on the subject of Armageddon? Oh, yeah. Okay. I don't know how I got off on this one, but might as well finish it up. Vespasian and Titus. Vespasian the general, who had served in Britain before that, and his son Titus, who also had served in Britain. Nero, before he killed himself, called them down to do a scorched earth policy on Israel. Start from Gamala in the north and go to Jerusalem's walls, devastating everything on the way. That's why Revelation says a third of the trees died, and then half of the trees died. Where the trees are marking in Revelation the progress of Titus and Vespasian as they came down into Galilee in a pincher movement to start destroying and herding the people in the north down to the south, trying to get as many people as they could inside the walls of Jerusalem so they could destroy them all at once. We find in Revelation chapter 13, there's a land beast, the second beast. He has two horns. This beast is got heads on his horns, and those two heads are Titus and Vespasian. They're on horns because of the pincher movement they used to come down into Galilee. Vespasian, the father, he comes straight down over land, and Titus comes through Egypt. And Titus ends up in Caesarea on the coast, and that's where Titus and Vespasian met up with their huge legions, and they just started moving down Galilee through Samaria towards Jerusalem. All right, now we get to Armageddon. Armageddon means Hill of Megiddo. That is in South Galilee or North Samaria. I've been there, and I've stood on a precipice above this place. I've stood on the mount. It's not really a mount at all. There's no mountain there at all. It's more like a hill. And the hill is there only because there's a town there, Megiddo, that had been built on over and over and over again down through many generations till that certain plot of land had grown upwards to become a hill. One town over the other. And one of the reasons that is because there were a lot of battles there. The peninsula of Israel was a land bridge for trade. The only way people from Africa could get to Europe was through that land bridge. The only way that people from Europe could get down to India on land was through that land bridge. They couldn't go any east of there because of the deserts. There was no way to get through, especially in the more ancient times. So that peninsula was very important to a lot of people, and therefore it was fought over and over again down through the millennia. It had become a great valley, really. I stood on the hill of Megiddo and looked down into a pretty vast valley, but one that was limited. It's almost like a big bowl looking down into it. It's funny that they call it Har Megiddo, the hill of Megiddo, rather than the valley of Megiddo. And of course, if you like the movie The Omen, it was there where they found the 7 daggers of Megiddo that was supposed to be used to kill the Antichrist. There was a huge battle there in the 15th century BC. That's a long time ago. The last great battle there was in 609 BC. There's still a town there, a small town, and there's, of course, the ruins of Megiddo, the old city. Why he picked Megiddo, we would suppose that not only is that in the middle of that land bridge, but because of the previous big battles in this area. Now, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the sixth angel poured his bowl on the great river Euphrates, that's 1612. And its water was dried up to prepare the way for the kings from the east. Look, kings is an artificial translation. The word there is basileia. It means rulers. Rulers can be anything from kings to presidents to generals to mayors to centurions. Rulers. It's just a generic term for those that rule. But you see why there's a nuance here. When it says kings, we're thinking of kings. It's a carryover from an old translation like the King James Version. There aren't many kings these days. And really, if we are going to translate that into language we can understand today, it might be translated rulers. So the Euphrates is dried up to prepare the way for rulers from the east. And this was fulfilled in that time because the Romans kept their garrisons of substitutes. After you served 16 years in the army, if you could survive that long, you were let go. And you were given a pension, and you were given a house and some land in some province. And usually that province was on the other side of the Euphrates River. So there was lots of Roman army men, especially retirees, living over there on the other side of the Euphrates. And of course, they set up camps, and a lot of times they would roust out those veterans to come and fight. They still had fight in them, though they had mandatory for them to leave after 16 years. Some of them were ready to keep fighting, so they were re-enlisted for the short term. And the Euphrates was indeed dammed so that these guys could get over from there. The 200 million that is mentioned coming over there, of course, is a loaded symbolic number that we'll explain at another time. And I saw issuing from the mouth of the dragon and from the mouth of the beast and from the mouth of false prophet 3 foul spirits like frogs. They are demonic spirits performing signs who go abroad to the rulers of the whole land. When you see world in Revelation, that's another carryover from the King James Version. Should be translated 9 out of 10 times as land. And it's what it speaks of. For land is primarily Eretz Israel, the Israel from the Nile to the Euphrates River. That whole place is supposed to be Israel, according to Yahweh in the book of Joshua. And now we see what kind of rulers these guys are. They're not kings after all. They're brought as to assemble for the battle on the great day of Elohim the Almighty. And right here is giving us a clue as to what's going on. This is the day of Yahweh. This is the day of the retribution against Jerusalem. This is the day that's spoken of in literally all of the prophets of the Old Testament. And what's the day of Yahweh all about? It is a judgment of Israel, not a judgment of the world. Not a judgment of the United States. It has nothing to do with the United States. It has to do with Israel. And then we have a parenthetical phrase here that's important. Lo, I am coming like a thief. Blessed is he who is awake, keeping his garments, that he may not go naked and be seen exposed. Well, I've done lots and lots of time on that particular verse because there are 5 witnesses in the New Testament that speak of Yahshua coming as a thief. That means if he's coming with clouds, the clouds are not witnesses. The clouds are concealment. He comes as a thief. He comes in a way that is usually unseen by people, though a few people can see because of when he ascended, or when I believe he ascended to the temple, but the young men that were around there, and there are a few disciples there, I guess, he says to the disciples, what are you looking up there for? The same way that you see him go, he'll return. So he goes off in a cloud, and there's just a few people that can see him. He's going to come back the same way, and he probably has. He comes concealed, and only a few people know it, because the whole world is under the deception that all of a sudden the sky is going to blow up, and Yahshua, the man, is going to come flying down with armies and hosts and legions. That's not the way it's going to work. His coming is not a coming. That's a mistranslation from Matthew 24. Parousia doesn't mean coming. What is the sign of your coming? The disciples say. It should say, what is the sign of your presence? Parousia means presence. It's translated there that way everywhere else in the scripture except here, because the scriptures are corrupt, and those that are writing them and transmitting them want you to be deceived. So they'll have power over you, the power of warning you that all this stuff is going to happen in the near future, and you have to toe the line and be in church, rather than it all happened in the past, which it did. If he comes back, he's coming back in the 7th millennium, which is now. And I have written and have believed ever since the beginning of this millennium that he is here. That's another story. But these rulers that come across the Euphrates River, they head to Israel and they assembled at a place which is called, in Hebrew, Armageddon, the hill of Megiddo. Okay, I'm going to look back at the monitor and see if there's anybody left here. Warren's here now. Welcome to our little group. What this means literally is that we have these, what do you call a substitute?
Brother Snyder, I think you mean reinforcements.
Thank you. Thank you, finally. I can count on you, Brother Shroomkoff. We've got Romans coming over here and assembling in Armageddon, and there hasn't been any evidence of that having happened in the past. The idea that the whole thing is really already done, just about everything else can be accounted for. What happens after this assembly is the seventh angel pouring his bowl into the air. And then a loud voice came out of the temple from the throne. We're speaking of a heavenly temple that is descending toward the earth. It becomes a city and hangs in the sky above the earth. The voice was, "It is done. It is done." This is very similar to the voice that the millions of people heard in Jerusalem in 70 A.D. while there was the siege of Jerusalem. Voices were heard from the sky, loud and clear. There were seen horsemen, cavalrymen, fighting men, warfare in the sky over Jerusalem. 2 million people witnessed it. They heard the noise of it. They saw the battle raging above Jerusalem. Lights were coming down. One light came down upon the altar in the temple. By this time, the Holy of Holies and many of the temple precincts were filled to the ceilings with rotting corpses. The holy place was made desolate by the rotting flesh of the people that these Sicarii and zealots had murdered. It is done. Here's the actual passage from Josephus. This passage, the events described here were happening before the eyes and ears of those assembled for the feast in 70 A.D., and Josephus is recounting as an eyewitness and an ear witness. He says, "Thus there was a star resembling a sword that stood over the city, and a comet that continued a whole year. Thus also before the Jews' rebellion and before those commotions which preceded the war, when the people were come in great crowds to the feast of unleavened bread on the 8th day of the month of Xanthicus, and at the 9th hour of the night, so great a light shone around the altar and the holy house that it appeared to be bright daytime, which lasted a full hour. This light seemed to be a good sign to the unskilled, but was so interpreted by the sacred scribes as to portend those events that followed immediately upon it. At the same festival also a heifer, as she was led to the high priest to be sacrificed, brought forth a lamb in the midst of the temple. Moreover, the eastern gate of the inner court of the temple, which was of brass and vastly heavy, and had been with difficulty shut by 20 men, and rested upon a basis armed with iron, and had bolts fastened very deep into the firm floor, which was there made of one entire stone, was seen to be opened of its own accord about the 6th hour of the night. Besides these, a few days after that feast, on the 21st day of the month of Artemisius, a certain prodigious and incredible phenomenon appeared. I suppose the account of it would seem to be a fable, were it not related by those that saw it, and were not the events that followed it of so considerable a nature as to deserve some signal. For before sunsetting, chariots and troops of soldiers in their armor were seen running about among the clouds and surrounding of cities. Moreover, at the feast which we call Pentecost, as the priests were going by night into the inner court of the temple, as was their custom, to perform their sacred ministrations, they said that, in the first place, they felt a quaking and heard a great noise, and after that they heard a sound as of a great multitude saying, "Let us leave here." Armageddon was the place of gathering of the soldiers from all over the place before the battle, the rulers.
At this point, I might interject that if you read the scripture closely, you'll see there is no battle there. This is simply the gathering place for troops, not the place of fighting battle.
Right again, my man. Well, we'll go to the archaeological news, and then the headline is Rare Archaeological Find in a Place Some Christians Believe to be the Site of the Future Battle of Armageddon. I would say the past battle of Armageddon. I would say that what is found in Armageddon is, well, let me just be precise. Archaeologists have made the exceedingly rare find of what they believe was once a Roman military headquarters. What else could this be? There's armaments all over the place. In Megiddo, in northern Israel, offering a glimpse not only of life during the early years of Christianity and Rabbinic Judaism, but also the occupation of the Holy Land by Roman troops. The Legio camp, or the Legion camp, located at Tel Megiddo, is situated in the place some Christians believe to be the site of the New Testament prophesied Battle of Armageddon. Excavation co-director Yotam Tepper told The Blaze, this is from The Blaze, Tuesday, by phone from the excavation site that his team made the find in a particularly fascinating location. The Blaze broke this story. This surprised me. On one side is Tel Megiddo, while in the other direction, a rare Christian inscription referring to Jesus Christos, which was uncovered in 2005 near the modern-day Megiddo prison. Tepper said the new discovery is significant because no military headquarters have ever been found in this part of the vast territories the Romans once ruled. This was one of the reasons that the futurists said that Armageddon has to be in the future, because we don't find anything there that has anything to do with military, at least the Roman military presence. Quote, it's the first Legion camp found in the eastern side of the Roman Empire. Listen to this. The archaeologist who is conducting the study alongside researchers, Jonathan David and Matthew Adams, described the site as a full-sized base measuring 300 meters by 500 meters, or 328 yards by 546 yards. That's big. The Times of Israel reported Tuesday that the Legio camp was the headquarters of the 6th Legion Ferrata, the Ironclad, in the years of the Jewish Revolt. Archaeologists, along with American and Israel volunteers this summer, found roofing tiles, some embedded with military imprints, clay pipes, and drainage ditches. They also discovered a large building at the center of camp that served as the commander's house. The archaeologists believe that the ditches are evidence of the planning that went into the site's construction, and also offer a hint as to where the main roads of the camp believed to have been served. As many as 5,000 soldiers may have once been situated. And that's about all there is to it, but some pictures. There's some pictures of some of the scales off of Roman armor. And what is this picture? Drainage pipes and so forth. Well, that's a lot of troops, 5,000. It's not 200 million, but you could never fit 200 million people in there, even if you gave them a 2x2 space. It's just not that big for such as that.
Well, brother, this is a very good find for us, because we have been trying to dispel all the fear everyone has about Big World War over there in that Valley of Armageddon, but we haven't had much evidence that it wasn't going to happen, except, of course, 200 million Chinese troops. Seem way too much to come over there. Why 200 million? And for China to march overland for that and cross Euphrates on that? I don't know. I have been in war, you know. Bad war, guerrilla war. It all scared me to death, all right, because I was very young. When I went in war, I shoot at a lot of people, and I be shot at many times, just miss me. And, of course, that story I tell you about the grenade that was a dud. Fortunately, I wouldn't be here right now. But I can say one thing about Armageddon that is very true, because our time is about up now, and Armageddon out of here. Was that a good joke, Brother Snyder?
Classic.
You put the rainbow in my cloudy day. My darkest blues have gone away. You make me thank the Lord for everything, and every hour is like the first of spring. You're my shooting star. Don't shoot too far from me. You're the only song that I can still recall, a way to sing along to you. The rhythm of your beating heart, even when we are miles apart. You make me thank the Lord for everything, and every hour is like the first of spring. You're my shooting star. Don't shoot too far